Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Ray Petree. I'm a columnist for the Augusta Free Press, and I'm joined today by a special guest, an esteemed guest, the son of the greatest wrestler to walk God's green earth, Justin Race.
How
Justin,
you
how are you
doing,
doing today,
everyone?
sir?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm
And
doing
all you
well.
out there in TV land or podcast land, how are you all doing?
Um,
All
Justin, over the
right.
last few years, you've taken the task of talking about your father's career, his incredible career, because I don't think a lot of people, a lot of younger fans know a lot about your father for a lot of reasons. Um,
Well, there's yes and no. It was kind of a catch 22 actually. I started realizing several years ago that I get 25 and this just happened at FanFest. 25-year-old came up, told me, well, first of all, I said my dad was his favorite wrestler ever. And I'm looking at him like, how old are you? He said 25. I said, you weren't even born when my dad retired. And he's like, YouTube. I watch him on YouTube all the time. I watch this and that, and whatever. So this happened a number of years ago. That just happened last weekend. But I started realizing that the popularity of old school wrestling was coming back. And with the advent of computers and technology and whatnot, and YouTube and Google and all these different ways to send information, my dad's more popular now than when he was world champion. So, I mean, I'll post a picture and a little story on Facebook or something, and I'll get several thousand people, not only viewing it, but taking wanting to talk to me, sending me messages and whatever. So it's been very it's been exciting, really. And as the years go by, it seems like he gets more and more popular, and I have to give it to technology for that to happen.
that's incredible. It,
Oh yeah, it blows me away. Young kids come on. How the heck would you know? And they say, "Oh, I love it, man. It's so much better than what we see on TV now."
my grandfather was a wrestling fan. Grew up in, where I'm from Central Virginia, and he was a Mid-Atlantic
Mhm.
fan, and he revered your father because, of course, he would come to the Crockett, the Carolina country, and defend his
Yeah.
title.
Oh yeah.
Um,
He defended his title in more places and more countries and more times than any other champion ever did.
he embodied the phrase "the traveling world's champion." Um,
Yes.
I guess before we get into that era of his career, let's start at the beginning. I've always heard your father had polio as a child. It,
I hear that a lot too. No, Dad never had polio.
so that's a myth.
Yeah, that's a myth. I mean,
One of my
he moved away from home when he was 14 years old because they couldn't afford to feed him. 14-year-old kid with polio, I don't think could do very well on their own.
I wonder where that myth comes from.
I don't know. I don't know if they get because he did have a major car wreck. He had a
Mhm.
wife and an unborn child that passed away when he was 17, I think. Um, but I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of because when they talk about when he was younger, that's the only thing I can think of that happened when he was younger. That was
Mhm.
major uh, event in his life was the car wreck that killed his first wife and unborn child.
You've heard that. I'm not the first person to tell you that before, right? You've heard that myth before?
The polio thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I just make
I
because
see
I've been
people.
told that a lot.
Yeah, well, people ask me that, and I'm like, no, my dad never had polio. At least he
Interesting.
didn't tell me, which would be
Right.
kind of odd.
Yeah, that'd be yeah, exactly.
I think I would know. I mean, I had a friend whose father had polio,
Hmm.
same age, baby boomer type age, and he, has to wear the braces and stuffs on his legs
Yeah.
because they didn't have, they didn't hang better back then.
Right.
So I don't, Dad would do very good in the ring with those things on his legs either.
You mentioned he punches his principal, knocks him out, he gets expelled from school, right?
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
a fact?
Yes, that is. He was in the ninth grade, and there's different versions of it. What he told me, they were in the gymnasium, playing dodgeball or whatever you do in the gymnasium in the 1940s, 50s. Um, and he did something, I don't know, but the teacher jumped like right on his back and run his head into the floor,
Hmm.
pissed him off. So he didn't really care who it was. He turned around and knocked whoever it was out. And it happened to be the principal.
Wow.
So I don't know. I I don't know why the principal jumped on top of him, but it pretty much goes to it's pretty much standard knowledge or wisdom that you don't mess with Harley Race. So the principal did. He got knocked out.
Wow, even at the ninth grade.
Yeah. When and dad is about 14, I suppose, 13, 14, ninth grade.
He leaves home. He begins training under Stanislaus and Vladik Zabisco, who, for those who don't
Hmm.
know, are great catch world champion wrestlers of the early 20th century. Did your dad ever talk
Carnivals.
about what it was like training with them?
Well, they came from the carnivals.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
well, he worked their farm all day, and his payment was them teaching him how to wrestle in the evenings in the barn. Of course, wouldn't ring or anything. You landed on hay. Well, they didn't back then. They did. It's not anywhere like nowadays where they have wrestling schools or anything. In fact, like even 20, 30 or whatever years ago before wrestling schools, they still had a training, kind of a training program to break guys in.
Hmm.
Back when Dad broke in the 50s, basically the Stanislavs beat the hell out of him until he got sick of getting beat up and learned how to wrestle.
Yeah.
That's pretty much how guys back in that Terry, Funk Dory, Briscoe, all those guys. That's how they. I mean, back to Bruno and Luthet. I mean, all going back before the wrestling school and the WWE and all that and WWF. Before
Hmm.
that, yeah, that's how you learned how to wrestle. They threw you in a ring with a couple of old guys, and they beat the hell out of you until you got sick of it.
While he was doing that, did he begin wrestling in the carnivals, or did that come afterwards?
Well, once he learned enough, he started to wrestle in the carnivals. The carnival is a tough gig because it's pay a nickel to beat the guy in the ring. Of course, he's the guy in the ring. And you don't know what you're getting. You can get military guys. You get 350-pound old hillbilly farm boys that
Mhm.
had drank their weight in beer by then. Um, yeah, you get some nasty. He wrestled the bear. He got to wrestle the bear. But yeah, that's kind of how he got started. Paying nickel to beat the guy in the ring, and he was the guy in the ring.
When you say the bear, do you mean a bear?
Yeah, yeah, he wrestled the real
Yeah.
bear, the carnival bear.
Wow. And he was 16 around this time, something like that.
15. He
Wow.
turned pro. He broke into the business to be a pro wrestler 2 weeks before he turned 16 years old.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, you're finishing your ninth grade, or I guess you're at that point in 10th grade at that point, and you're wrestling guys in the carnival.
Yeah, before he had a driver's license, he was wrestling.
That's
I
incredible.
actually, I think he forged some documents and got a driver's license, but we're talking the 1950s.
Sure.
A license back then was probably a handwritten piece of paper.
Um,
Yes, my son can drive.
um, you mentioned he was in a car wreck. He's about 20 years old at that point.
17, I think. 17 or
17
yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah.
with his wife, his first wife.
Yes. Yeah. They had not been married very long. She was pregnant. She was killed in the accident, and he was actually pronounced dead on the scene too.
Right.
When they got him to the hospital, they found a pulse, so they got him alive. But his left arm and right knee were so mangled, they figured they could fix the arm, but they were going to take his leg.
Hmm.
They didn't think there was anything they could do with it. And Gus Karras, very prominent promoter out of St. Joe back then, any of the old guys knows Gus Karras. He went to that hospital and he said no. And he took Dad to, I think, Jeff City or Columbia. He took another place where they had a specialist.
Hmm.
And somehow they put his knee back together. They even the specialist said, "I'll put his knee back together. He might be able to walk, but that's about all he's going to do."
Yeah.
And Gus just believed in Dad. Dad worked his ass off, and did what the doctors told him he couldn't do.
Did it, I mean, certainly from watching his matches, you wouldn't tell, but did it cause any long-term um, pain or did it hinder his career at all going forward after he got fully recovered?
I think it's something that if you get it that young in life, you pretty much get used to it. I think.
Sure,
I know
sure.
a lot of people got hurt by that the metal brace he had in his forearm. A lot of guys' jaws didn't like that thing,
Sure. I know,
or
like,
even or blocking a punch too. When he blocked a punch with that, man, that hurt.
right, right. I know Ric Flair when he got in his plane accident, which obviously is apples and oranges, but it caught. I mean, it obviously he had a great career after that, but it did change his body and the way he moved and things like that.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was I mean, I guess he
No,
was
my
younger
dad
than
wasn't
Flair
even
too.
close to the height of his career when all that stuff happened.
Yeah, right.
There were other accidents long 30, 40 years later that, yeah, hurt my dad's in the career, but my dad hadn't even started in professional wrestling when he got in that car wreck. So it obviously didn't hurt him too much.
Sure, sure. Not too long after that, I guess he goes to the AWA. He
Hmm.
worked with Larry the Axe Hennig, and they were a
Yeah.
phenomenal tag team.
Yeah, they were one of the better tag teams probably ever.
Yeah.
And very good friends. I Being on the road and being with the same guys every night, town after town after, can get old and tempers flare, and little things turn into big things, and there's arguments in the dressing room, whatever. But both Larry before he passed and Dad before my dad passed would tell anyone that would listen that not once in their entire relationship, up till the day they died, had they ever had a crossword or didn't agree with each other.
Wow.
That includes inside the wrestling ring too.
Sure. That's
Unbelievable color.
amazing.
So yeah, I mean, Larry, nicest guy you'll ever meet. Larry was, his wife Irene, my mother, and of course we were all good friends. We all lived in Tampa, Florida when we were really young. I think Kurt was a little older,
Hmm.
but the other two kids, there's pictures of their family and my family. Well, my family always just consisted of me, my mom, and dad, so that was it.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's pictures of us on the beach in Tampa, and also we were a close knit family type. But yeah, they never got across word.
When did you become cognizant of your, as a child, while we're on the subject, when did you become cognizant of his career? At what age did you realize your father was one of the best wrestlers alive and why he was leaving the house so often?
You mean being smart?
No, no, I don't want to say being smart, but I just mean, at what point did you realize your father was a professional wrestler? At what age?
Oh, well, I mean, it's the only thing I know.
Mm,
Um, I mean, and I always try to say this with all humility and in all modesty, but that was normal for me. What would have been really weird is if my dad would have been home for dinner at 6 o'clock at night.
sure.
Or home on the weekends, or that would have been weird.
Yeah.
I from the day I was born, I was in the wrestling business until today. I know I'm not an idiot. I can see how kids live. My friends, if their father was the insurance salesman or stockbroker or whatever, I could see how they lived. And sometimes I was envious of just having a regular, normal family. But, when I was 6, 7, whatever years old, I think it's 10 countries before I was 12 years old, or 12 countries before I was 10, something like that. My mom knows.
Wow.
Um, Yeah, so I mean, I get to travel around with him and got to experience the world with him like that.
Um, when did you become smart to the business? At what age?
Well, that kind of leads me to, I knew Dad was a popular guy. I mean, I knew everyone didn't have the Kansas City, the local newspaper or local TV stations. Back then they had a cameraman and a producer and a sound person and a talent on air talent and all. I knew it wasn't normal. My other friends didn't have those type of people showing up at their houses.
Sure.
I knew it was a bit different. But that was also during the crux of the is it fake thing. Really, really kind of hit me at that time. I mean, I
Mhm.
always said if I had a nickel for every time out someone asked me if wrestling was fake, I'd own my own island. So, yeah, you just get used to it, and that's how your life is. And I was blessed. It was a very unique way to grow up, but I was very blessed. And the travel and the people I got to meet and celebrity people I got to meet outside of wrestling all my life.
Mhm.
Not many kids get to travel around with. I I was spent so much time in the dressing room because I was, my dad's a young boy and dad was dad, and there were no wrestler in there. They weren't going to tell him his son couldn't be in there.
Right.
Um, but I get to be friends with them. I mean, I grew up with a bunch of 300 to 550 pound uncles.
Hmm.
When I'd hang out in the dressing room and goof around with them, goof around with dad, and then dad would have to go work, and he'd find someone and fucking bro, Frank, watch Justin on. And he
Hmm.
just kind of basically appoint someone in the dressing room as my babysitter type
Sure.
while he went out and wrestled. My mom was there. She was in the building. She was just sitting up talking to the wives or whatever. I liked being with the guys and my dad.
Sure.
So yeah, I'd have Bruiser Brody as my babysitter for him.
Wow.
So.
It's a hell of a
And I mean, it
babysitter.
was fun. I mean, it was like babysitting. They taught me how to play cribbage. We goofed around. I mean, they
Hmm.
treated me like a little nephew, So it was fun. It was a lot of fun. That's another reason, now that things have come full circle and we're going back out promoting my father as much as I am again. And when I run into the guys, who did I run into for the weekend? Oh, Bob Orton Jr. Or was it Bob Orton? Yeah, Bob Orton Jr. He looked at me and he said, "You have to be Harley's son." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I remember." Then they start telling me when they remember me and all this kind of thing. It's kind of funny, but it's certainly good to see them because I remember
Were you a fan of wrestling or were you a fan of your father's?
them. I was a fan of my father's, but I thought what he did was cool. I mean, I
Yeah.
wrestled myself. I started wrestling when I was 7 years old and wrestled all I could have went to college um, on wrestling scholarship. I won many state champions and national championships. Um, my parents never wanted me to be part of it. They wanted me to go to college and learn and be easier on my body and be with my family.
Sure.
So wrestling was never really an option for me. Um, like a lot of the guys that got their kids in, and no, I wasn't. That wasn't an option for Justin. But again, you remember that you just mentioned Dad being the traveling world champion. Well, I'll tell you what that entails. Being the traveling world champion at that time meant traveling about a half a million miles a year, half a million miles a year,
A million.
wrestling 300 plus, probably 320 days a year, traveling another 2 or 3 weeks just to get to wherever you're going because he wrestled on every continent except Antarctica. Um, and he wrestled almost an hour every night. So he, I think Jim Cornette said it. He said the human body is just not made to take all that.
Yeah.
Not just the traveling, do all the traveling. A human can't even take that kind of traveling. But then imagine having to wrestle an hour when you get there
Yeah.
against Ric Flair, against Tony, Terry Funk, or against, you know, wasn't just going out there for 1 hour for no reason. I mean, they were going out there and beating the hell out of each other for an hour.
Sure. Yeah.
So, with all that being said, that my parents just said, no, professional wrestling is not. And when I graduated, there's a picture. The reason I brought this up, someone posted that I posted first, someone reposted. There's a picture of my father and I standing on a balcony of a hotel, and the city that you're looking out on is Dallas. And it was during my graduation week from SMU, to
Hmm.
SMU at Dallas, Texas, Methodist University. And he said, son, I'm finally at peace. And I said, what do you mean? And I'm kind of paraphrasing. He said, well, for almost all of your life, I've had this little thing in the back of my mind wanting you to break into the business. I want you to follow in my footsteps, so to speak. But now I see you there. You have your degree. You're going on to postgraduate studies. He said, you're going to have a healthy, happy life and a happy family. You're going to get all beat up like me. And he said, so I'm finally at peace. Your mom made the right decision.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty cool moment with them, just me and him.
That's powerful. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I had a tear or two.
Sure. Everyone wants their father to be proud of them. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Um, I'm guessing you were born after he left the AWA, I assume, right?
Yeah, I was born in 1970. He was transitioning at that time.
Transitioning. Okay.
He won his first world title in 73,
Yep.
NWA world title in 73. But I was 2 years old at the time.
Sure.
People have asked me, have you seen him win any of his champion? I've seen him win all of the NWA championships. I saw him win all eight.
Hmm.
But the first one I don't remember because I was two.
Sure. Sure.
Next one
Um,
came when I was 6 or 7. So
did before we move on from the AWA, I have two questions. The first is, did he ever talk about Vern Gagne as a promoter, as a boss?
not a whole lot. I mean, he had respect for. They had their differences, but he had respect for Vern. Um, he he didn't like the way the AWA was run. Hence, he went to the NWA.
Sure, of
He
course.
didn't. It didn't expand enough. My dad thought it could expand more than it did.
Hmm.
NWA was all over the world.
Yeah,
So was the AWA and the WWF back then to a certain extent, but it wasn't the globally recognized champion that the NWA was.
of course.
And that's, what my father set out to do one thing, and he did it 8 times.
I know the AWA had an off season in the summer, I believe. Did your mom ever talk about what that was like, and did she ever miss that?
Hmm. Boy, that would be a question for my mother. I don't think I've ever asked her that. I'm sure she had enjoyed it because otherwise he was traveling all the time.
Sure, sure.
Although after when we talked about all the traveling he did, when he started like going toward retirement and slowing down is more when they got the divorce. I think they were used to kind of like a marriage that was apart. Once they were together all the time, I don't know if I like being around this person all the time.
Yeah.
But as far as, I mean, I'm sure if there was some, and that probably would have, I'm sure that me and Irene and my mom did something. I mean, I'm sure
Hmm.
they enjoyed themselves. So it's a beautiful state, wonderful state.
Yeah,
But I don't remember the specific stories because I wasn't born.
sure. Um, so he transitions in 70. By 73, he beats Dory Funk Jr. for the title.
Hmm.
Um,
73. Sorry about that, son.
no, no, that's okay.
I tried to move my head in front of it.
The rumor is that Jack or Dory Funk Sr. didn't want Dory Funk Jr. to lose to Jack Briscoe because it would be babyface versus babyface, or
Mhm.
maybe for other reasons. And the NWA chose your father because they knew if things went south, he could take the title in a shoot match. Is there truth to that?
Yeah, there is. And that's the reason that my father was a world champion for the majority of the 70s and, well, not majority, for almost a decade,
Yeah,
give or take some years. He was world champion for pretty much a decade because the NWA, first of all, they knew that, anything that happened here in the States, um, there wasn't going to be any problems. If someone was stupid enough to shoot on my dad, they could just get hurt, and that rumor travels quickly, and hence you don't get shoot on very much, except for
sure.
the young kid that comes in. Oh, well, give it a try, man. He's gonna get hurt. Um, so so he was the garter of the belt.
Yes,
They could send him anywhere on the planet by himself, no other American wrestlers or whatever, and when he left the ring, he was still gonna have the belt.
sure.
In fact, they sent Dad over with Rick sometimes, not to wrestle, but to make sure the belt came home.
Right. That's why Flair had an entourage for a lot of his career because they were afraid of what would happen if like exactly, yeah.
So yeah, he was the Grand Master in the ring, and you didn't want to mess with him. You didn't want to piss him off. He'd tell you if you were. Um,
So it's a quick flip from him to Jack Briscoe. He has it for less than 60 days. And then it takes him another 3 years to recapture that title. Do you remember when he won his second championship?
I was in Canada in 1977.
It was, yeah, it was in
Yeah,
Toronto.
yeah,
If I'm not
in
mistaken, it was in
Toronto.
Toronto.
Yeah. No, I was there. I just
Yeah.
I have I have so many thousand memories squeezed into like when I can first remember, 5, 6 years old until like high school that it's like I was 7, 8, 9, I don't know,
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, he won that. He beat Terry
Yep.
with the Indian Deathlock in the submission. And people again at that time were fake this, is it fake that, and whatever. My mom, they didn't hear me, or they didn't know I heard them, but my mom and dad, as we were walking out, she actually asked dad, she said, "Did you break Terry's leg?" And he didn't answer.
Wow.
So for all those people back then that said, "Oh, this is all fake and staged and whatever," well, I think he just broke that guy's leg purposely.
Right.
So I want
Did,
to figure out how to fake that one. Go ahead.
um, before we got on the call, just to break the fourth wall, we talked about how you have film of your father dancing with Dory Funk Jr. and Terry Funk Jr. at a house party.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and their wives.
and their wives, of
Dory and Terry and Dad weren't dancing together.
course. And their wives, of
Unless there
course.
were three ropes around them, then they'd go at it. Oh, I mean, they were normal. We have old Super 8 videos of just um, the three couples because they spent a lot of time with each other when Dad was working out of Amarillo,
Hmm.
and the just Super 8s of them having backyard barbecues and having parties after the wrestling matches where everyone obviously had been drinking quite a bit, and they're all making funny faces at the camera and just acting like normal humans.
Uh-huh.
But I was at an event last weekend, and Dory Funk Jr. was there, who I hadn't seen in decades. And I have, of course, those Super 8s digitized, and I opened my laptop and I showed him some of those. Boy, he started to laugh, and he was laughing at himself
That's
dancing in the
incredible.
60s
Wow.
with the clothes to go with it.
When you were young, I mean, how would wrestlers come to your house a lot? Did they stay at your house a lot? Do you have any stories you'd like to tell?
Oh yeah. Um, well, the funnest times were when either Andre stayed over or Bubba. We had a room in our home. It was called the Giant Room, and it was for um, well, it was for Bubba and Andre. I mean, it was
Hmm.
just huge, and their feet still stuck off the end of the bed. But
Sure.
one that I used to like to do with Bubba, it was down the hall quite a ways from mine. I'd go down there in the morning when I was getting ready for school, and his feet are sticking off the bed, and I'd take a something with a piece of paper, and I'd tickle Bubba's feet. Justin, you stop. Get up, Uncle Bubba. Come on, get up, come to school. And I'd finally leave, or he'd get up, or whatever. But I actually got Andre to do it. I took Andre to show and tell one
That's
at school.
incredible. Wow.
Yeah, it was fun. Well, he came in town. Bubba came in town to work, and he stayed with us most of the time. He worked here in America because he worked for them. But Andre would come in. He wouldn't be working or anything. He'd just come in town because he liked to hang out with us. And there was a clothing store here in Kansas City that made clothes for me.
Wow.
So a couple days before he'd come down, Dad called this clothing up. He'd say, "That goddamn son of a bitch, big son of a bitch, is coming in town again. Get ready to make some boat covers."
Book covers. Wow.
So yeah, it was fun having, but yeah, I took Andre. I asked him. He said, "Yeah, oh, of course." I said, "I'll go." That big old deep
Wow.
voice of his. So yeah, who and then he scared the teacher and faculties to death. The kids thought he was great, but
Sure.
he scared all the adults to death. The kids thought he was a big jungle gym. He
Wow.
had kids climbing out on his arms, but it was fun. A lot of
Did
my
your
friends
dad
even today remember that.
did your dad enjoy wrestling? I mean, I know Andre wrestled him for the title a handful of times. Did he enjoy wrestling him?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They had great respect for each other. It was, it was a different type of a match wrestling a big guy like that.
Hmm.
Things that aren't going to happen, they just simply can't physically.
Sure.
But then there are things that can happen that couldn't happen physically. So,
Your father was the first man to slam Andre the Giant, at least that we have
mm,
footage of.
that I know of. That's how I've lived all my life. It's funny. The first time he had him up there was in Houston, Texas, in 1978, and the picture is you've seen a lot of pictures of people slamming Andre, but
Hmm.
it's more of like kind of a dump. They kind of
Yeah.
pick him up and kind of have to flop him over, whatever. And
Yeah.
this picture, Dad has him like this.
Pressed him. Yep.
Yeah, and Andre's hands are on my dad's back, and Dad was whatever 270. I don't know, big guy, 6'1", and Andre's hands cover his back,
Yeah.
his two hands. And the whole time he was up there, he'd never been there. Andre says, "Boss, put me down. Boss, me down." My dad said, "Shut up, you big son of a bitch. Someone's got to take a picture of this."
Wow.
So,
Um,
so yeah, there was some fun. But I mean, we had parties after their matches and stuff too. Later in years, it was barbecues, but when I was younger, it was parties after the matches, and
sure.
all the guys would come and they'd come and stay and drink beer until my dad would get out a ukulele and start playing "The Party's Over, Go Home."
Wow. Um, Part of my job at the Augusta Free Press is every week I review one classic match.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
you have any matches you'd recommend me of your father's that would be fun to
Oh, my
watch?
the I think you can get most of it. The when my dad won the seventh world title against Flair. It's June 10th, 1983.
Okay.
That was
Okay.
when, because at the time the record was six set by Lou
Sure.
Thez, and it had been that record of six had been around for decades. And yeah, at the Kiel Auditorium on June 10th, 1983, and I have pictures, backstage pictures from that. Was when he became the seventh-time world champion and set the record. But that was the best match I've ever seen.
So I guess it's safe to say that's your favorite of his titles that he
Oh
carried.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that was cool. I mean, some of the ones in Japan were cool just because it was in Japan. Things were done differently.
Sure.
I don't know if you've ever seen a match in Japan, but the streamers, people are throwing the
Yeah.
streamers all over the mats, and the guys getting all these big bouquets of flowers. And so, big wrestlers with bouquets of flowers and streamers. They're all looking around, going, "When we're supposed to wrestle?"
I know I saw on Facebook you shared your father and Nick Bockwinkel versus Stan Hansen and Brody, which is a fantastic tag team match in all Japan, I assume.
That was one of the historic ones. That one was.
Yeah.
I I I think maybe they were in the ring a minute or two.
Yeah.
The rest of the time was spent not in the second row or the third row, but more like the second section or the up in the second balcony or wherever they wrestled.
Yeah.
That I think one of the funniest parts, if I think this is the same match, Dad and Brody were working their way, I think, toward the dressing room. You know, the cameras had problems trying to find him. The crowd's all,
Hmm.
but Brody disappears. He comes back out and he had mop and a wood mop handle in his hand.
Hmm.
And he cracks Ted over the head with the mop handle. And of course, the mop handle shatters. And my only thought was, did he like go to a janitor's closet and get a mop? Where did he come up with a mop?
Wow.
And there was a couple times they cornered Nick for a while, and Dad had to straighten the match out once or
Yeah.
twice. They were doing a number on Nick, and finally Nick got Dad and tagged Dad in. Dad went that, what he would do when things weren't going, no matter what it was. If things weren't going how he wanted in a match, or if he didn't like the way things were flowing, didn't look right or whatever, or they weren't doing what they were told, he put him in a headlock or wrist lock, and he'd get down next to him. "Don't piss me off,"
Wow.
and that straightened the match back out. So he did that with Frank and Stan that night, and he legit suplexed Stan. Stan tried to block it. And he said, "No, you're not blocking this.
Wow.
You're going over." And so when you try to block it and you still get thrown over, it's 10 times worse
Yeah.
on your when you land. It's 10 times worse. So he wasn't gonna get slammed, but he didn't know who he was messing with.
What was his relationship with Nick Bockwinkel like? I mean, were they friends?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Nick was he's another one. They're all really nice guys. You can take the meanest one. Yeah, there were some jerks. Unfortunately, um, is saying this as lightly as possible. There's more jerks nowadays than there ever was.
Yeah.
The guys back in the day knew who signed their paycheck. And it wasn't Sam Mushnick, and it wasn't Giant Bubba, and it wasn't uh, 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 Graham, it wasn't any promoter. People
Hmm.
that signed your paycheck were the wrestling fans.
Yeah.
And nowadays, you got guys that blow kids off, won't give them autographs, or they're just they think that it's the fans. Uh, uh, the fans are getting the good end of the deal. Well, they
Yeah.
get to see me wrestle, so
Right. Like it's a
you know,
privilege.
yeah. The
Yeah.
fans are like, yeah, it's a privilege to watch me wrestle. And back in the day, the guys thought it was a privilege to have those people watching them, butts in seats.
Right.
So it's kind of sad in a way, but these it's that's a different crowd too. The
Hmm.
audience is, and I think that's where you're seeing the rebirth of old school wrestling is. Back in the day when my dad wrestled, never once did I see a 10-foot ladder in the middle of the ring.
Yeah.
What the hell does that have to do with wrestling?
Absolutely.
Did they
Yeah.
have cage matches? Did they hit each other with chairs? Yeah, but that was more like natural, like Brody hit my dad with a mop handle.
Hmm.
But to have a 10-foot ladder in the match before the match starts,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's entertaining to some. And more power to them. God bless them. God bless Triple H and whatever for putting out a product that people like.
Hmm.
I don't
Sure.
necessarily like it that much. And there are a lot of people my age and older who grew up on my father, and then younger who have now started watching him via technology. That there's like a median shift going on a little bit.
Sure. Um, you talked about his relationship with Giant Baba, and
Yeah.
what did he like going to Japan?
Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
all did. Yeah, my mom went most of the time when we went. But yeah, Japan was wonderful. The most gracious people on earth.
When the NWA began to collapse in the mid 80s and the
Hmm.
WWF was rising to power, did was he
Hmm.
offered a chance to go to All Japan and just leave America entirely? Was that on the table for him?
It might have been on the table, but it wasn't a consideration.
Yeah.
He was Dad doesn't he doesn't change, doesn't like change. He begrudgingly changes, but no, he's not moving to Japan. I guarantee you that.
Did well, what were some of the other favorite places you liked to go when he was traveling? Because like you said, every continent except Antarctica.
Oh, I liked Australia, New Zealand. I liked Japan a lot. Um, well, the whole Eastern Rim, really, Malaysia, they're all Thailand. It's all cool.
Hmm.
I did like to go when we went to Samoa when Dad wrestled Peter Maivia.
Wow.
That was always entertaining. Um, and I'd say that's some a little bit in Europe. I liked Australia and Japan probably the best.
Mm.
Japan was a different. It's a whole different style of wrestling there. Very quiet, reserved crowd,
Hmm.
but there better be some blood. And even when there is blood, there's still a quiet, reserved crowd. It's like you never know. I mean, Dad told me it took him probably 5, 10 visits over there just to figure out how to. Dad could work any crowd.
Yeah.
He had in every match he ever wrestled, he had the crowd here in the palm of his hand the whole match. He said it took him a few trips over there to figure those people out because they don't ever give you a response, so you don't know if they like it or not.
Right. He dropped the title to Giant Baba twice.
Hmm.
Um, was that of the NWA's volition, or was that your father's decision?
Well, back then, for a certain period of time, the NWA had a board and a chairman and president, whatever.
Hmm.
But what Harley said was what went.
Sure.
If there was, I mean, yeah, they obviously conducted business. He wasn't a part of every little piece of business, but big decisions that needed to be made, they called Dad,
Hmm.
and Dad said yes. This and I mean, people ask, well, why does Bubba leave it, win it and lose it 5 days later, and why did he win it twice, and whatever. Well, From a business aspect, there's 180 million people in Japan.
Yeah,
It's a heck of a lot of potential wrestling fans. So giving their hero the world title a couple times is not a bad business decision.
sure. Absolutely. Um, how much of that had to do with your father's personal relationship with Baba in terms of helping his business?
A lot,
A lot, of course.
a lot. The 60s and 70s and 80s, Dad and Bubba together. Well, with Brody and Stan and Larry, and Dad did some tag team tournaments over there. He was tagged with Larry.
Hmm.
Um, here's a funny story. I just told this story at the SICW. Barbara Goodish, Frank Brody's wife,
Hmm.
loves this story. I'll tell you real quick because this is coming back to that uncle thing. So we're on this tour in Japan, a tag team tour, and Dad was with Larry the Axe and Stan and Brody and a bunch of other teams. And Brody wore the old fashioned sweatpants that have the little elastic thing at the ankle, and you
Yeah.
pull it up to your knee. You pull it up around your calf or above your calf or whatever. Well, he wore his sweatpants like that. Brody did, Frank did. Well, I thought that was pretty cool. I thought that looked cool, so I pulled up my sweat and wore them like that. And we were in the lobby of a hotel getting ready to leave one day, and he looks at me and he looks at Frank and he looks back at me. He looks back at Frank. God damn it, Frank! Look how you got my son dressed. You both look like hobos. Well, Frank looks over at me and he kind of gives me a wink, like we got it.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's just a little side story that's kind of what I meant by the guys just being my part of the family.
That's incredible.
But yeah, Dad and Bubba built Japan in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Dad made 63 trips over there, something like that, something
Hmm.
crazy.
Wow.
And they're usually 3-week tours. And after he won the seventh title, he was proclaimed a god in Japan.
Hmm.
It's back to old folklore in like samurai warrior days era, whatever. If a samurai warrior went into 7 battles and won, he was proclaimed a god. So when Dad won the seventh world title, they proclaimed him a god in Japan.
Wow.
So we talk about Flair's entourage. We had an entourage everywhere. We got just a whole mob of people following us around all the time when we were there. They're very gracious, not like a paparazzi type,
Sure.
pushing and shoving. They're very gracious and very kind, but nonetheless, they're following you everywhere you go.
Hmm.
And then to see, and then to see Bubba, you want to see a bunch of cars, a million cars and a million people in Japan all at once stop and look at you. A 6'11", over 300-pound Japanese man walking down the street with a 3 foot tall, blonde headed American kid on his shoulders.
Wow.
I mean, you got traffic stopping and people looking at him. Bubba's just walking down the street with me on his shoulders.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
it was
incredible.
fun. Yeah,
What
Bubba
was
was
he
good.
like? Did he speak English fluently?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
And Toko, his wife, spoke English very well too.
Wow.
Oh, in fact, my mom and my dad was always trying to learn Japanese when we were there. In fact, I went to university there after I graduated from SMU. I actually lived in Japan for a bit. But I was young and we were going from somewhere to somewhere on the bullet train or in the dining car. And I think, you see Mount Fuji go by just like in the pictures or the whatever the
Uh-huh.
postcard, I should say. And my mom, they get coffee. And my mom looks at Bubba. She said, Bubba, how do you say cream? Bubba looks at her. He said, cream. She said, Bubba, in Japanese.
That's hilarious. That's awesome.
Starts laughing. Little moments like that that was how I lived.
It's
Well,
interesting. Wrestling is, I guess people venerate old wrestlers. It's strange to hear them in such human terms, joking
yes.
on the bullet train. It's very, your insight is so interesting and unique to me.
Well, it's especially those guys. Now, the guys nowadays, you know, I don't know. It was, when kayfabe was really a big thing.
Hmm.
The guys took it seriously, and they really, really did. Um, as it kind of started to fade a little bit. The older guys are the ones that remember, and that they're the ones that have so much respect for each other because, for lack of a better word, they really were trying to beat the shit out of each other
Yeah.
for the fans. And there were many times when the promoter would go into the dressing room and say, Harley, I want you to take this tonight. And go into Rick's dressing room and say, Rick, I want you to take this one tonight. And then just see what happened.
Hmm.
So um, it was a totally different era, a totally different style, a totally different mindset. Those guys, they wrestled for long periods of time because they did what a wrestling match is supposed to do. A wrestling match tells a story,
Hmm.
and you have to be patient and let the story. I mean, you can't watch a 2-hour movie in 10 minutes. And Dad and those guys, they told stories in the ring. They had the hero and the evil, the antagonist and the protagonist, and the plot and the climates and the ups and downs and the swings and the
Hmm.
climax and the finish. And I mean, it's just a big story.
Yeah,
These guys don't know.
absolutely.
They just know how to jump off 10-foot ladders.
Um, your
Wrestle.
dad's first match against Ric Flair was in April 1977, and
Wow.
it felt like he was slowly grooming Flair to replace him.
He
Did he?
saw he saw Rick. My dad could recognize talent.
Sure.
I think he saw talent in Rick like probably from day one. He saw he saw the possibility there in day one, and by day 10, he probably knew there was a possibility, and by day 20, he was like, okay, this is the guy. Not that quickly, but you know what I
Sure.
meant.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, did in his mind was Rick his heir apparent, or was there someone else he had in mind that he wanted to follow in his footsteps?
No, he picked Rick.
He picked Rick.
Yeah, he was old enough to still be considered an older school wrestler,
Hmm.
but he was young enough to have some years left in him. I mean, he's 10 years younger than my dad, so he had some years left in him that dad didn't.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, he picked Haku too to take the
Right.
crown.
Absolutely.
And then that wasn't some board meeting with a big discussion or you Dad didn't talk a lot. Vince said, "Hey, you want to take the crown?" Dad said, "Haku." Vince said, "Okay, fine."
Yeah.
That was the extent of the comment. There wasn't any vote or any other perspectives or whatever because Vince really did respect my father. My dad did for the business. My dad did a lot for Vince's father, Vince Senior.
I was going to ask you what before we talk about Vince Jr., what was his relationship with Vince Sr. like? With Vince Sr., what was his relationship with his father like?
Oh, hell, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I guess it was kind of one of the. I mean, I grew up knowing that there isn't any way possible on earth that I could fill my father's shoes. No
Yeah.
sense in trying. Now, my sport was professional football. Had I done something, I got hurt and couldn't play, but had I done something in football, I might have had my own legacy in the sport. But if I went into wrestling, that's too big to fill.
Hmm.
And when he decided on someone, that's who it was. And if any other decision that was made by the NWA was overridden by him.
Hmm. Okay. So mid 80s, the NWA begins to cede the territorial control it had as opposed to the WWF was beginning its national expansion.
Hmm.
How did he feel at that time about the NWA and about particularly about Crockett and how he was controlling the NWA with the championship?
Well, I think everyone saw the writing on the wall. It was a matter of giving into it. These are old guys. They'd been not only have they been doing this for 30, 40 years, but they followed in the footsteps of the guys that did it for 30, 40 years and so on and so on. And for it to all of a sudden have a massive change in the whole model of the wrestling business. Um, a lot of guys, they just didn't want to, they didn't want to change.
Yeah.
My dad was one of them for a while. After a while, he realized that, you see the writing on the wall, and he's like, well, you got to go with the times.
Did he blame a lot of that on the fact that Sam Muchnick was not in control anymore, or did he feel like it was inevitable?
I think he felt it was inevitable. He just didn't really think about where it was coming from.
Sure.
But Vince's father had set up such a network up there, and it just being in that neighborhood of the country,
Uh-huh.
there's a lot of people there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean,
So, I mean, there, we're dad in Central States Wrestling, whatever, was here in Kansas City, 400,000 people. You're
yeah.
based in New York, you're surrounded by 14 million people.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it was inevitable that someone with uh, the groundwork already in place, but Vince has a heck of a businessman. I mean, he got to give him that. He might be shrewd or whatever, but he's a heck of a businessman. And he was the one that took the reins and just took hold of wrestling.
Did your father have a good relationship with Vince McMahon's father?
Yes,
Yes.
very much, very well. And he didn't have it bad with Vince. I mean, except for the time when Vince tried to talk him into uh, not going to Starcade and wrestling for WWF, and Dad told him no.
Right.
But he had, like I said, he respected my father. There was he when he made Dad the king of wrestling, the king of the ring, which became the king of wrestling. Uh, that was thought out by he and Dad. And Vince thought it was a gimmick, but Dad knew that it would be real.
Hmm.
And because he told Vince, he said, I don't want any more belts. I don't want your belts. I don't want your championships. I don't want this. I'm the king of wrestling.
Mm.
And Vince's like, oh, fine. Throw a goofy looking cape on him and a crown and whatever, and do like he did to Dusty and try to make fun of him almost.
Right, right.
And but what happened was Dad became the king, and even to this day, they don't. I mean, but Randy Savage won. He was the king of the ring. Haku was the king of the ring. There's a lot of guys that were, but they're still not referred to as the king today.
Yeah.
My father is referred to as the king by the old guys, the young guys, and everything else. So in a way, Dad had a long term look, a long term goal of that
Hmm.
becoming the immortal in the wrestling world, becoming the king. Just like Arnold Palmer was the king of golf, and you got Jack Nicklaus and Tiger Woods. Well, maybe they won more tournaments or could win the ball father, whatever. But Arnold Palmer's still the king.
Right.
Richard Petty's the king of auto racing. Doesn't matter who
Hmm.
wins what, he's the king of auto racing. Well,
Of
it's because
course.
my dad is. There's been more titles and more this and more that, but he's the king of wrestling.
Did he ever lament how the WWF was more geared towards children than the NWA was?
Lament? Um, no. In fact, my dad's own promotion was a family. He promoted as a family promotion, WLW. In
Hmm.
fact, before every event he ever held, he'd get up in the ring until he couldn't get in the ring anymore, but he'd still get up there and he'd take the microphone and he gave the audience. I don't know if it's still that big of it. Doesn't seem like it's as big as it was, but that garage wrestling or backyard wrestling, all those nitwits jumping off their houses into the plate glass door that's sitting over the barbed wire fence, over the burning hot coals or whatever. That's just nuts,
Hmm.
stupid nuts stuff. And that during that era, that was kind of a lot. I guess YouTube and stuff probably was that. And Dad would get up and tell the people, the crowd, especially the kids, he's like, what we do in this room, we're trained professionals, and basically tell them don't try this at home.
Hmm.
And then he'd get into that backyard stuff. And I remember see you kids jumping through a bunch of barbed wire. You're gonna have to talk to me about it.
I guess my last question is, did he have any special or close relationships with any wrestlers who are still working today?
It's interesting. Well, Rick, of course. I mean, well, Rick's not working. Oh, you mean working, not just anybody. Working. Wow.
And Trevor
Uh,
Murdoch comes to mind as someone who,
oh yeah, yeah, that's right. That's true. Trevor, hmm, Randy Orton. He liked Randy.
yeah,
Um, I don't know. He died 5 years ago, so the guys that are popular now weren't popular 5 years ago. Or some of them were, some of them were. I mean, that's one thing that everyone misses about the territory days
yeah,
is there was a champion. You
yeah,
wrestled in all the territories, and then the territories got their number one contender. The champion came in town, wrestles the number one contender, and you move on. Now the titles change hands every other day, and one guy he's won like 17 world titles. I mean, that's dumb.
yeah,
I mean, some things are just incomprehensible.
yeah,
17, that's incomprehensible. It's like the national debt, $30 trillion. I mean, that's incomprehensible. Someone actually thinks we're going to pay that back.
yeah.
I mean, so when you get the numbers, it just don't even make sense. It's just my dad, he was happy with eight. They were eight in the old school.
I know you're working on a book. Don't tell your
Mhm.
mother. Do you have any maybe a story, whether it's in the book or you didn't, in the middle of writing this, it didn't come to mind that
Yeah,
you
yeah,
tell?
yeah, yeah. I'll tell you a story. The book, incidentally, is exactly it's called "Don't Tell Your Mother," and it's exactly about what what the title indicates. It's stories about my dad and I when I was young and a little bit older. That we would, he was a pretty crazy guy, and he loved spending time with his son. So he'd do something on the way home. Don't tell your mother. So let's see here. I want to think of a story. Um, all right, we're in 1977. I've told some stories before on other podcasts. So if you've heard something, let me know. Um, Dad, 1977, my dad bought my mom a Porsche, an 11 Targa. Um, and back then they didn't manufacturers all over the country or world. They were made in Germany and shipped here. Well, it got here and she played with it for 3 or 4 days, and I think Dad walks into my. I was, if it was 1970, I'd have been 6 or 7. And come on, we're going for a ride. I said, all right. Now, everyone, the legend about my dad traveling fast is true.
Wow.
But if you're taken to school when you're in second grade at 100 miles an hour, when you're 14, when you're 14 years old, 100 miles an hour is normal. So whenever I was with dad and a bunch of guys in the car, I was the only one that wasn't white going like this with their fingers on with their fingers on them. I was the only one just looking around, have fun, and talking, whatever. And all the guys are scared to death. Anyhow, so dad gets on. We get out on this road. Off we go. And when you go by a police officer at that speed, what are you gonna do? And this is right back during it's right during Smokey and the Bandit. The movie Smokey and the Bandit came
Mhm.
out with Jackie Gleason or whatever. Well, he saw the cop. What are you gonna do? Several miles up the road, they had a Smokey and the Bandit roadblock for us. The cop cars pulled across the street, uh, headlights nose to nose like this. All
Wow.
the cops lined behind the cars with their guns drawn over the top of the cars and the shotguns out and everything. Like 20 of them, five, six, seven cop cars. And we obviously can't downshift and stop. Well, the police officers get kind of start come around the cars and start coming toward us. And they're like in the semicircle. Every one of them had their hand right on their gun. And then one of them broke forward. He walked up and he looked down into the driver's side window. He looked back and shook his head. He said, "Mr. Race, do you have any idea how fast you were going?" And Dad looked at me and said, "Well, the speedometer was pegged at 150." And the police officer, he said, "Why lie?" The police officer goes, "Sir, you were doing 163 miles an hour." At that time, it was 55. You were doing 163 miles an hour. You were tripling the speed limit. That's just, it's a car. I'm just trying to break it in. Trying to get it, trying to see how fast it goes. 163 miles an hour, really. I was letting off. He's just talking with this cop like this is some sort of, like challenge or something. And the cop just couldn't believe what he's hearing. So finally, he said, "Okay, sir, now that the car's broke in, The speed limit is 55 or around there, please. Would you give some we get some autographs for the guys? He got out and he signed autographs. We turned around to go home. No ticket, no nothing. Granted, he was going 163 miles an hour with a 6-year-old in the car,
Wow.
and no ticket, no nothing. And we start driving to home. He looks over at me. Don't tell your mother.
That's awesome.
And I never did. And I do podcasts now, and she'll listen to them. And I'll see her, next day or whatever. You guys did what? And I'm 54 years old.
Wow.
I'll tell her, I say, well, Dad didn't say tell her at when you're 35. He said don't tell you. So I never told you.
Sure. Of
Yeah.
course.
So anyway, it's a fun book. Just
That's
all hundreds, a bunch of stories like that.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been a
You're
pleasure.
yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate
Absolutely.
it. Come
Um,
back on when the book's out.
I look forward to it. I can't wait.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
yeah, I look forward to it. Please, and if you have an update in the future, let me know. I'd love to plug it on the show.
Okay.
And I'd love to have you back on when it comes out. But for now, uh, this has been Petree's Pit. Thank you guys so much. Have a great week, and I'll
Thank
talk
you.
to you soon.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you all out there.